Eric Paler, and today I'll be discussing the concept attainment model. The information about this model comes almost exclusively from the Models of Teaching text, ninth edition by Joyce, Ville, and Calhoun, available through Pearson Publishing. This model was originally pioneered by Jerome Bruner in the 1950s through 70s. In this model, the teacher provides students with examples and non-examples of a particular concept. Students are able to understand what that concept is by examining the exemplars through for particular attributes and by using those attributes which are not previously disclosed by the teacher, they will come to a concept that is important in that particular domain. And so this is an example of inductive thinking because the students are starting small with these exemplars and then arriving through this pattern to a wider concept. In terms of understanding this model, there are several considerations. One is that it is important that the exemplars the teacher provides are ones that are have an attribute that is critical for a particular domain. Another consideration is how much of that attribute is found within that particular exemplar that would definitely influence the student's decision making. There are also exemplars that might contain more than one attribute, and so students would perhaps alter their categorization or their concepts based on that, as well as perhaps making concepts based on the absence of a particular attribute, which would be the disjunctive concept. There's also the examination of these attributes in terms of looking at the entire piece or just a particular part. And so it depends on what concept the teacher wants the students to eventually derive in terms of what exemplars they provide for them. This model has several advantages. One is that it allows the teacher and the students to think about their own reasoning processes, their thinking processes. This also is an opportunity for perhaps metacognition between students or in the final stages with the teacher explaining their own thinking process. This also has increased efficiency in attaining concepts through practice, that students will eventually understand the nature of this kind of activity and apply it to their learning, not only in that course, but in other courses as well. Multiple stimuli also help students to develop their information processing ability because they're dealing with several exemplars all at once. Uh, if they're working in groups or even individually, this model can be applied. Um, it is quite flexible in that regard. And it also gives an opportunity for the teacher to integrate additional skills as well, such as a purposeful dialogue or accountable talk strategies that will foster better collaboration among students. And of course, this also fosters higher order thinking skills, particularly with the evaluation and the creation aspects. And for the application of this model, I thought about my own course, which is an eighth grade history course, a pre-AP. The student body is mostly higher level ELL students in an international school in China. And the learning standard that I wanted to apply this model towards is that students will be able to identify, describe, and evaluate the causes of World War One. This standard requires students to be able to do several things. One, they need to know what the causes of World War One are or were. They also need to come to this conclusion via documents and be able to describe how the document shows that particular cause. They will also need to evaluate the causes by uh, organizing them in terms of their relative importance. And they will need to eventually write an essay in which they can justify their conclusions using said documents or documents that are similar to them. And so at the end of the unit, students would have an assessment, what's known as a document-based question essay or a DBQ. This is in the style of the AP history courses, and this prompt would be a possibility when they eventually take the AP World History exam in grade 9. And so for beginning this lesson, or an overview of this lesson, it would first begin with a bell ringer that would activate their prior knowledge. Students would also be provided with the objective. They would be working in groups and given the exemplars, which are in the form of historical documents. They will need to collaborate with each other. Well, first they'll need to work individually by reading the documents and thinking of the what attribute they exemplify. Then they'll need to work together and come to the concepts and be able to present them as well as justify or explain it and their thinking process as well as justify their conclusions. And so for the bell ringer, uh, students would come in having done the previous night's homework, which would be to read an introductory article about World War One. The OER provides different articles at uh, a variety of grade levels or Lexile skill levels. And so students would have some basic knowledge of what World War One, how it initially began. That article discusses the topic more so chronologically than it does thematically. And so students would come in and they would be asked to know who this man is and identify the historical context. Probably right away, they would be able to say this is related to World War One because of their previous homework. And hopefully, they would be able to identify this as the person who assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand. And we can already start the class with one of the causes, which is the assassination attempt that this man carried out. And then we could go into what possible other causes were. Of course, the students brainstorming and me listing these on the board. And then students would see a slide similar to this one, a direction slide. At the same time, they would be given the documents and the graphic organizer. Students would be instructed for 10 minutes to read and first divide the documents amongst them. They're sitting in groups of 3 to 4 students. They need to read the documents, they need to annotate the documents, and as they're annotating, they are looking for these attributes that can help them to see that this document is related to the causes of World War One. Then after 10 minutes, they would go back into groups for 15 minutes. They would share what their document is about. They would complete a graphic organizer as a group where they would identify the attribute within the document as well as explain why that document contains that particular attribute. And from there, they would group the documents, which is how they would derive the concept. And then they would write a thesis that discusses the relative importance of these causes. And this slide contains an example of what those exemplars could look like. The exemplars are meant to show the students that there are additional causes, such as the alliances in Europe, the increase in militarism as well as nationalism in the decades leading up to World War One. I think it's important that the documents are only labeled with the letter, document A, document B, document C. I also think it's important that they are not in order. And there's no indication of what the topic of the document is about. So when students begin reading it, they're reading it with this mindset that they need to identify something. They don't necessarily know what it is, but they know that it's related to World War One. There's also an outlier document because in our curriculum, we're also trying to teach the students that they only need to use the documents that are relevant to their argument, unless they're going to develop a counter argument. And developing a counter argument is a skill that they practice in high school, more so around grade 10 and grade 11. But being able to see that this document does not belong with the others, that it doesn't contain the same attributes as the others, is a skill that I hope to see after each group has done their grouping that they've left this one out. Document F in this case. This slide has an example of what the graphic organizer would look like. On this slide, it has the document letters. In the second column, under part one, the students would identify what the attribute is or what the cause of World War One is, and then explain why in the third column. Once they have all of the rows completed amongst their group, they would be able to see it using column two what similarities the documents have. And then that would take them to part two, where the students would group the documents according to that attribute, which would give them the concept for, or rather, what the cause of World War One is. With those documents grouped, then they could go on to writing their thesis that answers the prompt, develop an argument that evaluates the importance of the causes of World War One. Their thesis might look something like the most important causes of World War One were militarism and the alliance system, for example. So after that individual and group activity has passed, I would probably call a student from each of the groups to share what their thesis is. I would also ask them, focusing on which ones they identified as the two most important causes. I would then go a step further to ask them what are the two documents that they use to come to that particular concept and what their justification is. So then they would go through the process of identifying the attribute and saying why they came to that cause. This will help them on their summative assessment when they'll need to uh, paraphrase the content of the document and also analyze it or explain how that document shows that the argument is correct. So as they're sharing with the class, they would also be answering my questions about the attributes, keeping in mind that it might be easier for them to talk about what the attributes are more so than what the concept is. But they should probably be able to say that in the two militarism documents, for example, that there's an emphasis on pledging allegiance to the states and joining the armed forces. And so if they're able to go that far, then they can later on come to the higher level idea of what the concept is, what the cause of World War One was. So with the application of this model, there are several considerations. One is that in the way that the model is presented in models of teaching, the teacher uses several different exemplars, up in some cases upwards of 20 or more. And so with this model, there are only seven that are being used. So that might have a chance. possibility that the students may not identify the attribute uh, correctly, or they may not feel as if there's enough proof for them to come to that particular concept. The other concern is that it fosters ambiguity. This is not really an issue with students who are high achievers in the class, but for students who are lower achievers in the class, this might be a difficult activity for them because they may not feel confident about the way that they've categorized the documents or the concepts that they eventually come to. They might also have barriers because of language ability, that these are uh, excerpts, so that's a consideration for time. I would also probably edit the document somewhat for language and cut out words that are not essential for coming to the attribute. But this is for the majority of students, English is a second language for them. And so there might be issues with processing or misunderstanding the concept or the attribute the first time around, which is why it is important for them to annotate as they are reading the documents. And of course, with collaborative work, there is a chance for unequal participation. Maybe three out of the four students are more engaged, whereas the fourth student has perhaps one document or the easier document, and therefore the level of participation is uneven. And so, with the application of this model, I think it's important that it not only be for this exercise, but it be for several exercises throughout the year so that students feel confident in the process and each in each iteration they have an opportunity to participate. And so that is the application of the concept attainment model for an eighth grade history course. Please let me know if you have any additional questions. Have a great day.